The Dominican Republic's geography has always played a role in its history and economic development, from colonization to occupation to its present as a top tourist destination. To see why, join me for this brief look at the political and cultural geography of the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic is the 128th largest country in the world, 18th largest in Latin America, and the second largest in the Caribbean, surpassed only by Cuba. Its size is equivalent to a slightly smaller West Virginia. Although an island, it is quite mountainous, with 4 cordilleras or mountain ranges splitting the country from east to west, including the Cordillera Septentrional or Northern, Oriental or Eastern, Sierra de Bauruco, and the main one, the Cordillera Central. This puts the country at an average elevation of 424 meters or 1,391 feet, the highest in the Caribbean. Its tallest point is Pico Duarte, rising up from the Cordillera Central to 3,101 meters or 10,174 feet, the highest peak both in the country and in the entire West Indies. The island also has rivers larger than you might expect. The biggest in the country in the West Indies is Yaque del Norte, running 296 kilometers or 183 miles from the Cordillera Central to the Atlantic. It's followed by the Yuna, clocking in at 209 kilometers or 209 miles, both on the northern part of the country. On the southern side, the more important body of water is the Enriquillo Lake, the largest in the Dominican Republic and the lowest point in the Caribbean, as it is 46 meters or 151 feet below sea level. The country's location in the tropics, status as an island, and broken terrain gives it a wide variety of ecoregions. According to the Köppen-Geiger scale, there are 8 of these. The Dominican Republic is the 87th most populated country in the world, the 13th in Latin America, and the 3rd in the Caribbean. Out of its 11.2 million, around 3.5 live in Santo Domingo, its capital, or around 31% of its total population. In turn, out of these, the vast majority, or 74.4%, self-identify as mixed, or indios, 17.8% as white, and only 7.8% as black. If you live in the US and this surprises you, you should know that the main reason is that because the DR was once under Haitian occupation, blackness is seen very differently here, so that a Dominican person who would be perceived as black in the US might or might not perceive themselves as black in the Dominican Republic. Politically, the country is divided into 31 provinces and 1 national district that houses the national capital. The largest of these is San Juan, while the smallest is the national district, followed by the Hermanas Mirabal province. These, in turn, other than the capital, are further subdivided into 158 municipalities which have their own elected mayors, unlike the provinces who have their governors appointed by the president. There are several ways one could divide the Dominican Republic. The government itself splits it into 10 regions as a way to develop a coherent development program. For our purposes, though, these can be simplified into 4 regions. These are the East Coast, the North, the Southwest, and the metropolitan area. We begin with the East Coast. Before the Europeans showed up, this area was part of a Taíno kingdom known as Higüey, which historians speculate was the Arawak word for sun, and which was ruled by an old queen named Iguanama. They left their mark not just in the name of the modern town of Higüey, but also in a number of caves in the region where the indigenous people left paintings of various animals and people interacting with them. These include the Cueva del Puente inside of the Cotubanamá National Park and Cueva de Berna on the eastern outskirts of the park. The most famous, however, is probably Cueva de las Maravillas, or Cave of Wonders, located between San Pedro de Macorís and La Romana, and which contains nearly 500 red and black pictographs. This region was the last to be conquered by the Spanish and was mostly a backwater through the colonial period. The 2 most important cities the Spanish founded, Higüey in 1504 and Hato Mayor del Rey in 1522, concentrated mostly on cattle ranching and the export of hardwoods. There is little left from that period except for the veneration of the Virgin of Altagracia, the Dominican patron saint, who is housed at Higüey's Basilica, probably the most recognizable church in the country since it's in the Dominican 50 peso note. The region's path changed after the 1860s when sugar producers fleeing the 10 Years' War in Cuba brought investment and know-how to the region and began its cultivation around San Pedro de Macorís, making it the economic mainstay of the region. This expanded to La Romana in 1917, a place that had begun as an oil town 20 years earlier and continued well into the middle of the 20th century. But soon that path would change once more, transforming the region into the top tourist destination it is today. This began in the 1970s when Charles Bluedorn, an industrialist CEO of the Gulf and Western conglomerate, built an estate for himself on the company's sugar mill property called Casa de Campo, or Country House. When he unexpectedly died in 1983, this was open to the public and became the country's first resort. Roughly at the same time, a strip of land known as Punta Borrachos, or Drunkard's Point, previously unreachable by land, began to be developed with a new name, Punta Cana. Its white sand beaches and blue turquoise waters soon made it a favorite with visitors, making it not just a top destination in the island, but in the whole of the Caribbean. The region still has some nice beaches not overrun with resorts, for now anyway, like Playa Limon, where you were more likely to be by yourself and the occasional horse tour, or Boca de Yuma, more of a ramshackle town off the beaten path. Perhaps the best one, however, are the powdery white beaches around Isla Saona. That's because they are inside the Cotubanamá National Park, a protected area of semi-humid forest that offers snorkeling and diving tours in places like the Padre Nuestro cave. Although this part of the island shares much with the rest in terms of traditions, celebrations, and sports, Sammy Sosa was born here, for example, this region does have some interesting cultural distinctions because of the influence of the Cocolos, English-speaking black immigrants from the various British Antilles who came to work in the sugar plantations in the late 19th and early 20th century. They brought with them their music and dance, which can still be seen in carnivals and national holidays. They also brought their food, like yaniqueques, crispy fritters that Dominicans love to eat in all kinds of ways, and you will find everywhere, including the beach, as well as drinks like guava berry, a liqueur originally made in St. Martin from a fruit that, fortunately for Dominicans, also grows in the island around El Ceibo. Meanwhile, the place that captures a much more tragic reality in this region is Sabana del Mar, a town on Samana Bay from which Dominicans set sail to try to reach Puerto Rico so they can eventually make it to the US. They often fail and pay with their lives. We continue with the northern region. This was the first area to be encountered by the Europeans when Columbus landed somewhere north of Hispaniola, the exact place is unknown, and built the first Spanish fort in the Americas, La Navidad. Native resistance forced them to abandon the site and build another one at what today is the Parque Histórico La Isabela, a protected area that has the remains of their building efforts. The native possession of gold sparked their interest and brought further colonization and the foundation of the major towns in the region, including La Vega in 1494, Santiago de los Caballeros in 1495, Puerto Plata in 1502, and Montecristi in 1506. This region was perfect for trade, especially with the British, and in the late 16th century it brought prosperity to the region, but this was also illegal and enticed pirates. In response, the Spanish built the Fort of San Felipe, a massive fortress completed in 1577, now a museum. But it was not enough, and in 1605, aiming to stop the contraband, the Crown ordered the forced depopulation of the northern and western part of the island. Known as the Osorio devastations, it was a huge mistake for the Spanish, as it gave way to a rival French colony on the island, Saint-Domingue, what is now Haiti. Nor would this mark the end of disputes over the territory. It was here, for example, that some crucial battles in Dominican history took place, including with regard to independence from Haiti, like the Battle of Santiago in 1844, Haitian reconquering attempts, like the Battle of Sabana Larga in 1856, and efforts to remain independent from Spain, like the Battle of Montecristi in 1864. As it happens, because the Samana Peninsula had an eastward orientation, a deep channel, and an easy-to-defend port, it made for a tempting site for foreign countries, including France, Germany, and the US. In fact, part of the motivation for the American occupation of the island that lasted from 1916 to 1924 was to make sure Germany could not establish a base there. By then, the United States had already lost interest in building one itself because it had decided to build one at Guantanamo in 1903 instead. The region was critical even in relationship to other conflicts. It was here, for example, that the Manifesto of Montecristi, a document outlining the reasons for Cubans to rise up against the Spanish, was written by Máximo Gómez and José Martí in 1895, right before they sailed to fight for that island's independence. Today, the region is known for its many natural wonders and tourist attractions. Above all, its beaches, which are some of the best in the Caribbean, including Playa Rincón, Cayo Levantado, Playa Grande, Playa Dorada, to name a few, and similar beach towns like Cabarete, which feature all kinds of water sports. There's also El Morro, a hill which is great for hiking and rewards you with great views, Las Cascadas de Damajagua, a series of waterfalls semi-hidden in the northern highlands, which make for a memorable experience, the Reserva Científica Loma Quita Espuela, a national park that contains the country's largest remaining rainforest, and some historical sites of note, such as General Luperon's house in Puerto Plata, a museum set in what used to be the home of a former president and independence hero, the Fortaleza San Luis, a now military museum in Santiago that played a role as a stronghold in the various conflicts in the region, the house of the Mirabal sisters outside of the town of Salcedo, a group of brave women who fought against Rafael Trujillo's dictatorship, as well as the marble tomb of Lilis, a 19th century Dominican dictator who was murdered in the town of Moca in 1899. His resting place is inside Santiago's cathedral, an impressive building in the Gothic and neoclassical styles. Beyond that, the region is known for being the birthplace of Joaquín Balaguer and Juan Bosch, the two men that probably did more than anyone to shape the fate of the Republic in the latter half of the 20th century. Also for the Cibao, a rich, fertile valley that has produced not just some of the best cigars in the world, but also merengue, the Dominican national music, born around Santiago and now making people sway all over Latin America and the world. The next region is the Southwest. This area is the least visited and populated of the four. In pre-Hispanic times, the region was mostly covered by the Cacicazgo or Jaragua, one of the 5 Taíno chiefdoms the island was divided in, which included much of modern-day Haiti. Although not much of their imprint is left, this region does have the largest pre-Hispanic monument in the Caribbean, the Corral de los Indios, what archaeologists believe was a ceremonial and astronomical Taíno site. Once the Spanish got there, they established a few towns in the region, most notably Azua and Banica in 1504. But given the native resistance and little European interest in the area, the Spanish did not leave much of a mark either. In fact, the region's most important city, Barahona, was founded in 1802 by Toussaint Louverture, Haiti's independence hero, in an attempt to create a port that might compete with Santo Domingo. The lack of economic activity maintained this region's status as a backwater until the present day, as the region has a disproportionate number of people below the poverty line. Today, interest from the central government is much more concentrated on security issues related to Haiti, especially in places like Elías Peña and Pedernales, where the military presence and CESFRONT, the immigration police, coexist with the Haitian markets, places where hundreds of vendors come twice a week to sell fruit, vegetables, and cooking utensils. Nonetheless, this region has some of the most worth visiting places in the Dominican Republic. The first is the beach at Bahía de las Águilas, a completely undeveloped 5-mile stretch of white sand hugged by a rocky karst landscape. The beach is part of the Parque Nacional Jaragua, a 500-square-mile UNESCO bioreserve that features turtles, manatees, and flamingos, and much flora diversity. The third is the Laguna de Oviedo, a super salty lagoon that is both the largest in the country and one of the best places in the Caribbean to birdwatch. The other place to check out local birds is the Parque Nacional Sierra de Bauruco, a park stretching some 380 square miles at the northern end of the Pedernales Peninsula. Right next door is the Lake Enriquillo, a body of water that is great to traverse on a boat if you want to see the crocodiles that call this place home. Finally, there's the Cloud Forest of Cachote, a protected area that is great for hiking and features 31 different species of birds. Finally, this region is known for being the source of Larimar, a rare and unique blue gemstone that is only found in the Dominican Republic and which is a favorite for souvenirs. Discovered in 1974, its only source is a mine outside of Barahona. The last region is the metropolitan area around Santo Domingo. This zone has been the center of power in the country since colonial times. It was founded in 1496 by Bartolomeo Colón, Columbus's brother, who had been put in charge by the navigator and left behind to colonize the island. Since then, people have always lived here, making it the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the Americas, and which gave the country its name. As such, it reached lots of firsts, including the first university founded in 1538, the first hospital, the first Spanish book written in the Americas, the first convent, and the first cathedral. Many of these you can still see in the colonial part of Santo Domingo, which covers around 11 square blocks and also features half a dozen museums, including the Museo de las Casas Reales, the former Spanish governor's house, as well as other historical buildings like Fortaleza Osama, the oldest colonial military edifice in the Americas. The city's prominence also attracted occupiers throughout Dominican history. In 1586, it was captured by the privateer Francis Drake and forced to pay a massive ransom. In 1801, it was occupied by Toussaint Louverture in the name of the French Republic. In 1822, by Jean-Pierre Boyat as part of the Haitian invasion of the Spanish side of the island, which lasted over 2 decades. And finally, as a redoubt of Spanish power during the War of Restoration between 1863 and 1865. You will find reminders of these around town and in the Dominican bills, but the most important is El Baluarte del Conde, the site where Dominican independence was proclaimed in 1844 and which today has a mausoleum that houses the country's independence heroes. The region's importance has also translated as the birthplace of a disproportionate number of Dominican people, including Alberto Pujols, Pedro Martinez, and David Ortiz, all top baseball players. Junot Diaz, prominent writer, Oscar de la Renta, perhaps the most famous fashion designer from Latin America, Maria Trinidad Sanchez, and Juan Pablo Duarte, independence heroes, and of course Rafael Trujillo, an infamous dictator who ruled the country with an iron fist between 1931 and 1961. Not surprisingly, there's not much that celebrates him in the country, but if you visit his birthplace in San Cristobal, you can still find 2 notable Trujillista sites. The first is the Casa de Caoba, a country house that is now abandoned and from which he carried out some of his atrocities, and the Castillo del Cerro, a building that overlooks the city originally meant for Trujillo's personal use, although he never spent a night there, and which now houses a museum detailing his dictatorship. The other sites of note in the region are the Caves of Pommier, which contain the largest collection of pre-Hispanic art in the Caribbean, and the Parque Nacional Submarino La Caleta, an underwater preserve that is the country's most popular diving destination. And with that, we conclude our trip across the Dominican landscape. May you be able to visit the Dominican Republic in the not too distant future.